Okay, here we go. Chapter 4, Part 2, The Invention of Dreams. Hugo was still nervous about leaving the station, but he took a deep breath and headed downstairs to the vast subway system that snaked beneath the city like hidden rivers. So, subways aren't something that we have in Colorado, but we do have them in New York City, and they have them in lots of other places in the world. They're like train stations underground, and they help you travel from place to place. They have them in Paris. They have them in London too. They're really fun to ride, and they go really, really fast. And in Paris, they call them the metro, and in the UK, England, they call them the tube. Hugo entered the lobby, where a small woman sat at a big desk. He asked to see the library, and after looking him up and down in a disapproving manner, she said, "No." "No? You're too small and too dirty, and you must be accompanied by an adult. Goodbye," she said. Hugo just looked at her. He glanced at his hands and his clothes and realized that he hadn't thought about the way he looked in a long time. Hugo knew the woman was being unfair, but he didn't know what to do about it. He was trying to figure out what to say when he thought he heard his name being called. "Hugo? Is that you?" "Etienne!" Hugo ran to him. "What are you doing here? I was just about to ask you the same thing." The small woman at the desk looked at Etienne and said, "You know this filthy child?" "Madame Maurier, this is my friend Hugo." She pushed her black-rimmed glasses to the top of her nose and answered the phone, which had just begun to ring. "Sorry about your job at the movie theater," Hugo said. "It worked out well, actually. When I was fired, I had just started classes here, and they were able to give me some work in the offices. I'm studying to be a cameraman." Hugo glanced at Etienne's eye patch, and Etienne smiled. "Having an eye patch actually makes it easier to look through a camera. I don't have to close one eye like everyone else." Etienne tapped his eye patch and said, "Now tell me, what in the world brings you here?" "I need to find something in the library. Can you help me?" "Follow me," said Etienne. Hugo didn't look at Madame Maurier, but he was very happy to walk by her as they headed to the library. The library was on the second floor. It was clean and orderly, with rows of perfectly placed shelves which seemed untouchable. In the center of the room was a large painting that caught Hugo's eye. He didn't know what it meant, but he liked it. Etienne helped Hugo navigate the card catalog so he could find the book he needed, and then brought him to the correct shelf. Etienne stood on his toes, pulled the book off the shelf, and handed it to Hugo, who sat right where he was and opened it. Etienne sat down next to him. "You know, one of my teachers wrote that book. Will you tell me what you need it for now?" But Hugo couldn't talk. The book was called The Invention of Dreams, the story of the first movies ever made. It was written by René Tabard a year earlier, in 1930. Hugo opened to the beginning of the book and read. In 1895, one of the very first films ever shown was called A Train Arrives in the Station, which was nothing more than what the title suggests, a train coming into a station. But when the train came speeding towards the screen, the audience screamed and fainted because they thought they were in danger of being run over. No one had ever seen anything like it before. So here is a photo of that actual first clip of the train coming into the station on that film. And a photo of a piece of film is called a still. Hugo flipped through the pages of the book. There were images of men playing cards, people leaving a factory, each one a still from an early movie. Hugo continued turning the pages, and then he saw what he had been hoping to find. His father's favorite movie was called A Trip to the Moon. The filmmaker Georges Méliès began his career as a magician, and he owned a theater of magic in Paris. This connection with magic helped him immediately understand what the new medium of film was capable of. He was among the first to demonstrate that film didn't have to reflect real life. He quickly realized that film had the power to capture dreams. Méliès is widely credited with perfecting the substitution trick, which made it possible for things to appear and disappear on screen as if by magic. This changed the face of movies forever. So look at it again. There she is in the middle. And now she is gone, which is indeed a magic trick. A Trip to the Moon, Méliès' most famous film, followed a group of explorers as they went to the moon, fought the moonmen, and returned home with a captive, to great acclaim. If one day, far in the future, mankind is truly able to fly to the moon, we will have Georges Méliès and the movies to thank for helping us understand that if our dreams are big enough, anything is possible. Unfortunately, Georges Méliès died sometimes after the Great War, and many, if not all, of his films are lost. So the Great War is World War I. That's what it's called. Died? He's not dead, Hugo said aloud. Who isn't dead? Said Etienne, who had been reading over Hugo's shoulder. Georges Méliès. He runs a toy booth in the train station. Etienne laughed. I'm not kidding, said Hugo, and he's Isabelle's godfather. So, Chapter 5. This one's short. Papa Georges made movies. Later that day, Hugo returned to his room with a book from the library under his arm. Etienne had arranged for him to borrow it. He read the book again and again, especially the part about Georges Méliès. He stared into the face of the man in the moon. Suddenly, he heard a knock on his door. Hugo? It's me, Isabelle. Hugo jumped up and opened the door. Isabelle had brought her own flashlight. She walked with crutches and her foot was bandaged. What are you doing here? He asked. How did you even get here with crutches? Everyone thinks I'm in bed. It took me a long time to climb out my window and make my way here. They sat down on the bed and Isabelle immediately started to cry. What is it? Hugo said. I'm sorry I slammed your fingers in the door, and I'm sorry I didn't tell my grandparents that I stole the notebook. I was mad at you for taking my key. Which you stole, Hugo said. Isabelle ignored him and kept talking. And now Papa Georges is very sick. His fever is so high and he's talking to himself. He just mumbles strange things like a wingless bird, a burned up building, a splinter, a fly, a grain of sand. I'm worried about him. I never have seen him this sick before. What if he dies? He's not going to die, said Hugo. You don't know that. Papa Georges supports all of us. What would we do? Mama Jeanne called a doctor who wrapped up my foot and gave us a prescription for Papa Georges. But the toy booth is closed, and we have no money to get medicine or for anything else. Everything's going to be all right, Hugo said. But first I have to show you something. Hugo handed her the book from the Film Academy library, opened to the page with the film still of the rocket in the moon's eye. Isabelle stared at it in disbelief. That's what the machine drew. Read it. Isabelle read the pages about her godfather. Papa Georges made movies? I can't believe it. But he won't even let me go to the movies. My father saw this movie when he was a boy, said Hugo, who pointed to the still from A Trip to the Moon. He described this scene to me. I recognized it when the automaton drew the picture. Hugo told her about his trip to the Film Academy library and seeing Etienne again. Isabelle put down the book. Why did Papa Georges stop making movies? How did he end up at the train station? She stretched out her leg. Why didn't anyone ever tell me any of this? Before I left the Film Academy library, said Hugo, I told Etienne everything that was going on, and he brought me to meet his teacher, the one who wrote this book. I could tell that they really didn't believe me. So what did you do? Asked Isabel. I invited them to your apartment. You what? Etienne and Rene Tabard are coming to your apartment next week. Monsieur Tabard wants to see your godfather for himself. Mama Jeanne will never allow the visit. And don't tell her about it. Just wait until they show up. That's a very bad idea, Hugo. Well, I could cancel the visit, but I don't think we should. This is how we can find out everything. Don't mention this to your godmother yet. Don't tell her about the book or ask her any questions. Let's wait until Etienne and Monsieur Tabard come. Then she'll see that there are people who are happy to have her, that her husband is alive, who remember him, and she'll answer our questions. I'm sure she will. Isabel shook her head. She looked very confused. You know, you never told me where you got the mechanical man. Hugo had never told anyone the whole story. It had been his secret for so long he wasn't sure he even had the words. But he looked at Isabel, and it was as if he could feel all the cogs and wheels begin to engage in his mind. The words suddenly came together. He related the whole story, from his father's discovery of the automaton up in the attic of the museum, to the fire, to the arrival and disappearance of his uncle. He told her about discovering the toys in her godfather's booth and how he used them to fix the automaton. He told her everything. When Hugo finished, Isabel was quiet for a few moments. Then she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling me." Come by the booth tomorrow after school. I have an idea. But the booth will be closed. No, it won't, said Hugo.